The Cit's Daughter and the Earl's House. Chapter 1. The Bargain in Wax and Ribbon. In the spring of 1813, when London's pavements were bright with new leaves and old gossip, Miss Arabella Hart's name began to travel, quietly at first, then with the particular speed reserved for money. Her father was not a gentleman. He did not pretend to be. Mr. Silas Hart was a city man, an iron-willed merchant with ships on the Thames and ledgers that, when opened, made other men's faces soften into admiration or harden into envy. He had brought himself up from nothing but hunger and arithmetic. He had done it so thoroughly that he could now purchase dinner invitations from men who once would not have allowed him into their counting-houses. Arabella had been raised with a Polish more expensive than her father's origin, French lessons, music, and a measured manner that was neither timid nor bold. Her governess had taught her that gentility was not a birthright so much as an arrangement, quiet voice, steady eye, and a refusal to be hurried. Yet on the evening her father spoke plainly of marriage, Arabella's schooling did not keep her heart from tightening. They were in the drawing-room of their house in Bloomsbury. The lamps were lit. Her embroidery lay untouched, the needle still threaded as if she might return to it once the world became reasonable again. "Lord Ashcombe has agreed," Mr. Hart said, as if he had negotiated another cargo of timber. "His solicitor will have the settlements ready within the fortnight." Arabella looked up from the small white rose she had been stitching. "Agreed to what, Papa?" "To take you as his wife." There were moments in life when the mind refuses to accept words, no matter how clear. Arabella felt the sensation of standing at the edge of a stair and being pushed, not violently, but with certainty. "I have not met Lord Ashcombe," she managed. "You have seen him," Mr. Hart replied, "at the Wilton Musicale and at Lady Drayton's." "Seen is not met." Mr. Hart's mouth thinned, not with cruelty precisely, but impatience. "You are 23. You have been presented. You have done your part. Now I do mine." She set down her embroidery hoop with care, because if she gripped it she might splinter the wood. "What is Lord Ashcombe's part?" "To restore honour to my name," her father said sharply, then checked himself as if remembering he was speaking to his daughter and not a rival. "And to secure yours." Arabella's pulse steadied rather than raced. It was an old habit. Calm first, feeling later. "I require no security beyond what you have already provided." "That is naivete," Mr. Hart said. "You think money keeps you safe. It does not. It merely makes you noticeable." Arabella had known, in a vague way, that her father was weary of being noticeable. His triumph was loud, his pride made enemies. "You mean," she said softly, "that I am to be placed behind a title like a screen?" Mr. Hart's eyes sharpened. "I mean, I am tired of being spoken to, as if I am a visitor in my own country. I mean I have made enough to buy 100 houses and cannot enter one drawing-room without someone's cousin whispering. I mean—" His hand struck the arm of his chair once, a single emphatic blow. "I mean, I will not have you married to some sweet-faced clergyman's son who will spend your dowry on sentiment and leave you poor. You will marry into a family with blood and consequence." "And they will accept me?" Arabella asked. Mr. Hart's expression did something complicated. Pride and calculation, yes, but also a flicker of uncertainty that disappeared as quickly as it came. "They will accept your dowry." It was the first honest sentence, and it landed like a weight. Arabella sat back, her hands folding in her lap. "Is Lord Ashcombe in want of money?" "His estate is old," Mr. Hart said, "old enough to have been bled dry by heirs who assumed the land itself could pay their debts by virtue of existing. He is not a spendthrift. He is merely burdened. And you are to ease his burdens." "I am to purchase a place," Mr. Hart corrected. "For you, for me, for the name." Arabella found her father's gaze and held it without flinching. "Is this your wish, or yours?" and his. Mr. Hart looked away first. It is necessary. In the days that followed, necessity dressed itself in ceremony. Arabella was taken to be measured by modistes, to sit through consultations about lace and pearls that seemed designed to blur her thought with repetition. Her mother had died when she was 12. There was no woman in the house with the authority to fight for her. Mrs. Lyle, her aunt by marriage, offered sympathy in small spoonfuls. "Better an Earl than a gambler," Mrs. Lyle murmured, patting Arabella's hand as if she were consoling a child with a scraped knee. "These noblemen can be proud, but at least you'll have a house. A name." A name, Arabella thought, as if it were a shawl to be draped over her shoulders and admired. Lord Ashcombe called twice before the wedding. In both visits, he was impeccably civil and entirely absent. He spoke to Mr. Hart about settlement clauses and dates, and to Arabella about the weather, as if she were a portrait he might one day hang in a gallery. He was handsome in a cool, remote way, dark hair, disciplined mouth, eyes like slate that seldom warmed. When he did look at her directly, she felt examined rather than seen. "You are very quiet, Miss Hart," he said once, as they stood near the window and the conversation in the room swelled around them. "I have been taught not to fill a room with myself," Arabella replied. Something in his expression moved, perhaps surprise, perhaps amusement, a useful lesson. "Is it one you learned early?" she asked before she could stop herself. He paused, the faintest tightening at the corner of his mouth. "Early enough." Then he excused himself and returned to speaking with her father. Arabella stood very still, the sense of her own small rebellion lingering like the aftertaste of strong tea. The wedding took place at St. George's, Hanover Square, as all marriages of consequence seemed to do, whether they were built on love or currency. Arabella wore ivory satin and lace. She walked up the aisle with her chin level and her hands steady, though beneath her gloves her fingers were cold. When Lord Ashcombe spoke his vows, his voice did not falter. When Arabella spoke hers, neither did she. Outside, in the crush of carriages and congratulation, she saw for the first time the woman who would be her mother-in-law. The Countess of Ashcombe approached like a winter morning, beautiful, bright, and without warmth. Her gown was a silvery grey that made Arabella's ivory seem almost too hopeful. "My son has been courageous," the Countess said, kissing Arabella's cheek with air rather than lips. "We shall do our utmost to make you comfortable." Comfortable, not welcomed. Lord Ashcombe's sister, Lady Honoria, offered a smile that did not reach her eyes. His younger brother, Mr. Julian Ashcombe, bowed with a flourish that suggested he was either charming or careless. Arabella suspected both. And then there were the glances, measuring, assessing, deciding. Arabella had grown used to being noticed, but this was different. In Bloomsbury, she was the merchant's daughter pretending to gentility. Here, she was the merchant's daughter daring to touch a lineage. They travelled to Ashcombe Hall 3 days later. The estate lay in Hampshire, the land rolling and green beneath a sky that seemed permanently undecided. Ashcombe Hall itself was vast, built of honeyed stone that looked golden in sunlight and solemn in shade. Its windows were tall, its doors heavy, its interior lined with portraits of pale men and proud women who stared down as if appraising Arabella's worth. She was shown to her rooms, which were elegant enough to impress anyone who had not noticed their careful distance from the main family suite. Lord Ashcombe dined with her that first evening in a formal silence. Servants moved like shadows. The Countess presided at one end of the table, Lady Honoria at the other, as if to bracket Arabella with scrutiny. Julian lounged, as if the chairs were made for his comfort alone. "It is fortunate," Lady Honoria said, lifting her wineglass, "that you have such a capable father, Arabella." Arabella smiled politely. My father has always believed in capability. It is a city virtue, the Countess observed, her tone neutral in the way neutral things can still cut. Arabella's fingers tightened around her fork, just enough to remind herself she was present. Virtue does not choose its birthplace. Lord Ashcombe's eyes flicked to her then, quick, assessing, and away again. After dinner, the Countess spoke of household routines, charitable obligations, and the proper management of servants, as if Arabella were a governess newly hired. Lady Honoria spoke of visiting schedules and neighbours whose names Arabella had never heard, but was expected to remember. When at last Arabella and her husband were alone in the corridor outside her rooms, he paused. You acquitted yourself well, he said. It was not praise so much as a report. Arabella inclined her head. I am relieved. His gaze moved over her face as if checking for cracks. My mother can be particular. So I have observed. A silence fell, the sort that is either a door opening or a door closing. Lord Ashcombe's expression settled into the familiar remote composure. You will find your place here, he said. And then he left her standing alone beneath the gaze of ancestors who looked unimpressed. Arabella went into her room, closed the door, and allowed herself one long breath. She did not cry. She would not give even the empty air the satisfaction of seeing her falter. If she must suffer, she would do it with dignity. But she had not yet learned how many shapes suffering could take. Chapter 2. A house built on pride. Weeks passed in a rhythm that was at once structured and bewildering. Ashcombe Hall ran like a small kingdom, with its own laws and small mercies. Arabella rose early, learned the names of footmen and scullery maids, endured Lady Honoria's gentle corrections and the Countess's sharper ones. She wrote letters to her father with careful cheerfulness because she suspected he would read any unhappiness as ingratitude or weakness. Lord Ashcombe, Edmund, she reminded herself, because they were married and it was absurd to speak of him in her mind only as a title, was often absent. If not in London for parliamentary duties, then in the estate office with stewards and bailiffs, or riding across the land with the restless energy of a man who could not sit still with his own thoughts. When he was with her, he was courteous. He did not raise his voice. He did not insult her outright. His disdain was more refined than that. It lay in omission, forgotten invitations, conversations that excluded her, decisions made without consulting her. Once, she found herself at breakfast with the Countess and Lady Honoria, while Edmund had already left the table, having received a note, and departed without so much as a glance toward Arabella. Business, Lady Honoria said lightly, spreading marmalade as if it were the natural explanation for a husband vanishing from his wife's mourning. Arabella sipped her tea. He did not mention it. The Countess's eyes were steady. My son has carried responsibilities for years. He is not accustomed to explaining himself. Arabella smiled, small and contained. Then perhaps he shall become accustomed. Lady Honoria gave a soft laugh that might have been amusement or warning. Oh, Arabella. Yet Arabella did not retreat. If her life was to be an arrangement, then she would at least understand the terms. She began visiting the estate office, ostensibly to learn about the land. The steward, Mr. Cresswell, looked alarmed the first time she appeared, as if wives were not meant to step into rooms where numbers lived. My lord is engaged, he said. I am not asking for my lord, Arabella replied. I am asking for the accounts. Mr. Cresswell blinked. The accounts. I am the Countess of Ashcombe, Arabella said evenly. I have brought a dowry meant in part to secure this estate. I should like to know how it is secured. There was a pause in which Mr. Cresswell seemed to consider whether refusing her might be safer than obeying. In the end, prudence bowed to hierarchy. He brought out ledgers, thick, ink-heavy volumes, and set them before her. Arabella's fingers itched at the familiarity. Numbers were not intimidating, they were honest. Unlike people, they could not pretend to be something else. She read, and as she read, the shape of Ashcombe's burden became clear. There were debts, old ones, some years neglected, others recently refinanced. There were tenants behind on rent, fields that had been poorly managed, repairs deferred until the very walls seemed to lean with fatigue. There were expenditures that did not fit, sums withdrawn in irregular patterns, payments made to a name Arabella did not recognize. J. Ashcombe. Julian. Arabella kept her face smooth and her voice calm. Mr. Cresswell, who authorizes these withdrawals? The steward's eyes shifted. My lord's brother is permitted certain allowances. Allowances are regular, Arabella said. These are not. Mr. Cresswell cleared his throat. The family will collapse under debt if allowances are made without sense, Arabella interrupted, then softened her tone. Forgive me, I do not mean to speak harshly, but I would like clarification. Mr. Cresswell hesitated, then leaned closer as if the very room might report him. My lady, there are matters delicate. Arabella's gaze held his. Delicate matters are usually expensive. He swallowed. My lord does not wish his mother to be distressed. And so he is distressed in her place? Arabella asked quietly. Mr. Cresswell said nothing, which was its own answer. That evening, Arabella waited until Edmund returned from his ride. He came in smelling of wind and leather, his cheeks slightly flushed from the cold. My lord, she began, then corrected herself. Edmund. He paused at the sound of his name, as if it did not belong in her mouth. Yes? I visited the estate office. His expression sharpened. Why? Because Ashcombe is drowning, Arabella replied without drama. And I do not wish to be a wife who smiles while the house collapses. A flicker crossed his face. Anger first, then something like embarrassment. You have no right. I have every right, Arabella said, her voice steady. Not because I am your wife, though I am, but because my dowry has been poured into this estate like water into dry earth. If it is to vanish into debt and indulgence, I should like at least to watch it happen with my eyes open. Edmund's jaw tightened. You speak like your father. Arabella did not flinch. And you speak like a man who would rather be proud than solvent. Silence fell. The corridor's portraits watched. At last Edmund said more quietly, You do not understand. Then help me, Arabella replied. His eyes searched her face, perhaps for mockery. He found none. Arabella had learned, long ago, that dignity was not coldness. It was simply the refusal to beg. Edmund exhaled, a controlled release. Julian has habits. Gambling. A muscle moved in Edmund's cheek. Yes. And you have been paying his debts? Yes. Why? Edmund's gaze went past her, toward a portrait of a stern man in a powdered wig. Because he is my brother. Because my father died when Julian was 16, and Honoria was 14, and my mother... He cut himself off. And your mother cannot bear shame, Arabella finished softly. Edmund's eyes returned to hers. If Julian is ruined, the scandal will touch us all. It will touch you. Arabella's voice was calm. Then we must stop it, not cover it. Edmund's mouth tightened, and Arabella thought he would end the conversation by sheer force of will, but instead he said, grudgingly, What would you propose? It was the first time he had asked her for anything. Arabella felt a strange, contained satisfaction, not triumph, but the smallest shift in the arrangement. We begin by knowing exactly what he owes, she said. We prevent further withdrawals. We speak with him, and we do not permit your mother to be used as an excuse for ruin." Edmund's eyes narrowed. "You would have me confront him? In my own house?" "Yes," Arabella said simply. "Or it will not be your house for long." He studied her as if he had never truly looked at her before. "You are not afraid?" Arabella's smile was faint. "I have been afraid. I simply refuse to look like it." The confrontation, when it came, did not occur as Arabella expected. Julian, when summoned to the library, arrived with his usual careless charm. He greeted Arabella with a bow that was almost sincere. "Sister," he said lightly, "how domestic you look in your husband's kingdom." Arabella regarded him calmly. "How desperate you look in your brother's." Julian's grin faltered, then returned, sharper. "Ah, the city girl has teeth." Edmund stood with controlled stillness, his hands behind his back. "You have taken money from the estate accounts." Julian spread his hands. "Taken? No. Borrowed. Temporarily. You know I always mean to repay." "You have not repaid in 3 years," Edmund said coldly. Julian's gaze slid to Arabella. "And does your little wife approve of your tone, Edmund? She seems the sort who likes firm numbers and firmer men." Arabella did not blush, did not look away. "I approve of truth," she said, "and I disapprove of thieves." Julian's eyes flashed. "Careful, my lady." "Or what?" Arabella asked softly. "Will you wager me?" Edmund's control cracked just slightly. "Enough!" Julian's smile became thin. "Very well. What is it you want? A sermon, a lecture about responsibility? I assure you I have heard them all." Arabella stepped forward and placed a ledger on the table. "I want to know whose name has been making withdrawals on your behalf." Julian's expression shifted, an instant too quick. "Mine, of course." "It is signed J. Ashcombe," Arabella said. "That could be Julian. It could also be James, or John, or—" Julian's eyes sharpened. "There is no other J." Arabella watched him. "Then why do some withdrawals occur when you are not even in Hampshire?" Julian's composure wavered. Edmund's gaze turned suddenly intent. "What do you mean?" Edmund demanded. Arabella's voice stayed calm. "I mean that someone has been using your name, or you have been lying about where you have been." Julian's mouth tightened. For the first time, the careless mask looked like what it was: paint over rot. "You have been reading too closely," he said. "I have been living too closely," Arabella replied. Edmund stepped nearer, his voice low. "Julian." Julian's eyes flicked between them, and something like calculation moved behind them. Then, with a forced laugh, he said, "Very well, it is not only gambling." Edmund's face went still. "Then what?" Julian leaned back against the table, crossing his arms. "If I tell you, Mother will learn, Honoria will learn, and you—" His gaze lingered on Arabella with a hint of contempt. "You will have married into a family even less respectable than you imagined." Arabella's spine remained straight. "Tell us anyway." Julian's smile was bitter. "It is not my secret alone." Edmund's voice cut. "Tell me." Julian's eyes hardened. "There is a letter. A man in London. A debt, not of money." Arabella felt the hairs at the back of her neck lift. "Blackmail," she said quietly. Julian's gaze snapped to her, annoyed that she had named it so swiftly. "Yes." Edmund's breath came shallow and controlled. "Who?" Julian's laugh was short. "A man who knows something about our late father. Something Mother would rather die than have whispered at Almack's." Edmund went utterly still, as if the floor had shifted beneath him. Arabella watched his face and understood suddenly why pride could look like cruelty. Pride was often fear in finer clothing. "What does the man claim?" Arabella asked, her voice gentle now. Julian's eyes were sharp, wary. That father had a son. Edmund's head turned, slow. Impossible. Julian shrugged. "That is what Mother says. That is what I said. Yet the man has proof enough to frighten her, and he has demanded money to keep his mouth shut." Arabella's mind moved quickly. A secret heir, illegitimacy, scandal, the sort of story that could sour a title. "And you have been paying him," Edmund said, the words like ice. Julian's jaw clenched. "At first, yes. Then I could not pay alone. So I borrowed." Edmund's voice was flat. "You have been bleeding Ashcombe for a scandal you refuse to name." Julian's eyes flashed. "I have been saving Ashcombe from ruin of a different sort." Arabella stepped in before the brothers' pride could turn the room into a battlefield. "We require the letter," she said. Julian's gaze sharpened. "What?" "The blackmailer's letter," Arabella repeated calmly. "We read it. We determine whether it is true, and if it is false, we end it. If it is true—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We handle it, not by feeding him money, but by controlling the narrative." Edmund's eyes turned to her, startled. "Control?" Arabella met his gaze. "You are an Earl. You have influence. Your father's reputation may be bruised, but your family cannot be held hostage forever. The first step is knowledge." Julian stared at her as if he had not expected the city girl to know anything beyond embroidery. "You think you can outwit him?" Julian said. Arabella's smile was small. "I think I have been outwitting men who underestimate me since I was 12. Edmund's expression shifted, fractionally. Respect, perhaps, or the first reluctant acknowledgement that she was not merely a dowry with a heartbeat. Julian hesitated, then reached into his coat and produced a folded paper sealed with dark wax, cracked at the edge. He tossed it onto the table. Arabella picked it up carefully. The seal bore a crest, an ash tree. The impression was poor, as if pressed in haste or by an unskilled hand. "Forged," she murmured. Edmund's head snapped. "What?" Arabella's fingers traced the wax without breaking it further. "This seal is wrong. The ash tree is inverted. Your family crest is not." Julian froze. "How would you know that?" Arabella's eyes lifted. "Because I have been living under your portraits for weeks, Julian. I have seen the crest on every letterhead in the estate office." Edmund stared at the seal as if it had transformed into a weapon. Arabella unwrapped the letter with care and read. The hand was bold, the demands explicit, the threats vague but poisonous. It referred to the boy and the old sin, and claimed the existence of a baptism record. Arabella's gaze narrowed. It was written to frighten, not to prove. "This man is bluffing," she said quietly. Julian's laugh was sharp. "Or you are naive." Arabella shook her head once. He would not be vague if he had certainty. He would not threaten whispers if he could produce a name. Edmund's eyes remained on the paper. He mentioned a baptism record. Arabella's voice stayed steady. "Then we find it. We do not pay him to hide it. We find it ourselves." Edmund looked at her then, properly. The remote courtesy fell away for a moment, replaced by something rawer. "You would do this?" he asked, as if he did not understand why she might trouble herself. Arabella met his gaze, calm. "If Ashcombe is to be my home, Edmund, I will not allow it to be built on fear." Silence held the room, thick as velvet. Then Edmund said very quietly, "You surprise me." Arabella's smile was faint. "So you keep telling me." Chapter 3. The Quiet War. The investigation began not with dramatic rides or reckless confrontations, but with letters, carefully phrased, sent to parish clerks and old family solicitors, requesting records that might confirm or deny a long-ago baptism. Arabella did not announce what she was doing to the Countess. She understood now that Lady Ashcombe's pride was not simply arrogance, it was armour. To tear it off in public would be to wound her, perhaps fatally. Arabella was not cruel. Instead, Arabella worked quietly. She visited the estate office daily. She pored over old correspondence, tracing the family's movements in the year the supposed child must have been born. She asked the housekeeper about former servants, about distant cottages on the estate where a woman might have been hidden for a time. At first, Edmund resisted her involvement. He spoke less, kept his distance, attempted to manage the crisis alone. But Arabella's competence was relentless. She did not nag, she did not plead. She simply did the work, calmly and persistently, until the work itself demanded to be acknowledged. One evening, Edmund entered the estate office to find Arabella alone at the desk, her sleeves rolled slightly, her hair pinned back with practical simplicity. The lamplight made her look less like a bride and more like a woman who belonged to herself. "You should not strain your eyes," he said, as if searching for something safe to criticize. Arabella did not look up from the ledger. "My eyes are quite capable." He paused near the desk. "My mother believes you spend your afternoons arranging flowers." Arabella turned a page unhurried. "Then let her believe it." Edmund's mouth tightened. "She is not." "I know what she is," Arabella said gently, looking up at last. "You need not defend her to me. I am not here to defeat your family, Edmund. I am here to keep it from destroying itself." His gaze moved over her face, as if seeking the mockery he had been taught to expect from outsiders. He found none. "Why?" he asked, the single word carrying more weight than it should. Arabella's expression softened, not into weakness but into honesty. "Because I do not like helplessness," she said quietly. "Because my father made me learn early that security is not given, it is made, and because—" She hesitated, then finished simply, "because I am your wife." Edmund's eyes flickered. Something in his expression loosened, just slightly. "That is a formidable set of reasons." Arabella smiled faintly and returned to her work. Edmund remained standing, as if he had forgotten how to leave. Days later, a reply arrived from a parish near Portsmouth, an old seaside parish where the Ashcombe family had once kept a small house. Arabella held the letter, her fingers steady. Edmund stood beside her in the library, Julian hovering like a restless shadow. She read aloud, "No baptism record exists under the name provided. However—" Arabella's eyes narrowed. "There is mention in the curate's notes of a private christening conducted at the request of a gentleman's steward. The child's name was not entered. The mother's name was not entered." Edmund's breath caught. Julian swore softly. Arabella lowered the letter. "So something occurred." Edmund's voice was low. "If a private christening happened, it suggests the boy exists." "Or that someone wanted it to appear so," Arabella replied. Julian scoffed. "Always the city logic." Arabella looked at him calmly. "Always the survival instinct." Edmund turned to her. "What would you do next?" Arabella's eyes were steady. "We identify the steward." That took time. Stewards came and went, like seasons, but Arabella's strength was patience. She sifted through decades of records until a name emerged. Mr. Hargreaves, dismissed abruptly the year after the private christening, dismissed for impropriety. Arabella's pulse remained calm, but her mind sharpened. "He was dismissed," she said. "But where did he go? Mr. Cresswell found the answer after several inquiries. Mr. Hargreaves had taken a position with a minor baronet near London. He was alive. He was old. Arabella proposed they visit. Edmund's immediate instinct was refusal. Too risky, too exposing. The Countess must not know. The neighbours must not know. Arabella listened, then said, "Edmund, we cannot solve this behind curtains forever. If we are to defeat blackmail, we must confront its source." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Very well." They travelled to London under the pretence of parliamentary duties. Arabella's return to the city did not feel like home. Bloomsbury now seemed smaller, as if she had outgrown it in a single season. Mr. Hargreaves lived in a cramped lodging behind a baker's shop. When Edmund knocked, the man who opened the door was thin, stooped, and wary. His eyes widened at the sight of Edmund. "My lord," he whispered, as if afraid even the walls might hear. Arabella stepped forward, her voice calm. "Mr. Hargreaves, we wish to speak about a christening conducted in Portsmouth 24 years ago." Mr. Hargreaves's face drained. He tried to close the door, but Edmund's hand shot out, blocking it. "You will speak," Edmund said quietly. Mr. Hargreaves's breath came shallow. His gaze flicked to Arabella, perhaps expecting softness. What he found was composure. Arabella spoke gently, but with a steel core. "Sir, someone is threatening Lord Ashcombe with a story involving a child. If that story is true, it must be dealt with honourably. If it is false, it must be ended. Either way, hiding behind fear will only feed the man who profits from it." Mr. Hargreaves swallowed hard. "It was not—" He shook his head, as if trying to dislodge the memory. "It was not your father, my lord. It was your uncle." Edmund went still. "My uncle, Lord Meryton." Mr. Hargreaves nodded, eyes wet with dread. He had a girl in Portsmouth, a fisherman's daughter. He said the child was not his, but he feared scandal, so he made me arrange a private christening. Then he dismissed me to silence me." Arabella's mind moved quickly. "Lord Meryton is dead," she said. "Yes," Mr. Hargreaves whispered. "And the boy—" Edmund's voice was taut. "Where is he?" Mr. Hargreaves hesitated, then sagged as if the years of carrying the secret had broken his spine. "He grew. He took a trade. He is near." Julian's blackmailer, Arabella thought, or someone connected. "Name him," Arabella said softly. Mr. Hargreaves's lips trembled. "Thomas Merrin. He works in a printing office. The old man's gaze darted. "He came to me a year ago asking questions. He said he deserved compensation." Edmund's jaw clenched. "So he is the one." Mr. Hargreaves nodded miserably. "He wrote the letter, or had it written." Arabella's gaze sharpened. "Then we can end it." Edmund looked at her, grim. "How?" Arabella's voice was calm and practical, not with threats, with truth. Edmund's eyes narrowed. "Truth will ruin us." Arabella shook her head. "No. The truth is that your father did not have an illegitimate son. Your uncle did. That child has no claim to your title. He has only a grievance, and grievances can be addressed, quietly, decently, without handing him control of your life." Edmund stared at her as if he had never considered that decency could be strategic. Arabella continued, "We offer him a settlement, not as ransom, but as acknowledgement of hardship caused by Lord Meryton's cruelty. We require, in exchange, a signed agreement ending all demands, and we ensure the agreement is legally binding." Edmund's expression was taut. "You would pay him." "I would resolve him," Arabella corrected softly. "There is a difference." Edmund's eyes held hers, and something shifted again, respect deepening, tinged now with reluctant admiration. They arranged a meeting with Thomas Merrin in a solicitor's office, neutral ground. Arabella insisted on being present. Thomas Merrin was not what Arabella expected. He was not slick, not noble. He was a man with ink-stained fingers and eyes that carried both anger and hunger. "You're the Earl," he said, staring at Edmund with raw resentment. "You live in a house built on what my mother was denied." Edmund's expression remained cold. "My uncle harmed your mother, not my father." Thomas's jaw worked. "The Ashcombs harmed her. Blood is blood." Arabella spoke before Edmund could answer with pride. "And what do you want, Mr. Merrin?" Thomas turned his gaze to her, startled. "I want what is owed." Arabella's voice was steady. "What is owed is not a title, because you have no claim. What is owed is the acknowledgement that your mother was wronged and that you were left without protection. We will offer you a settlement, but if you continue to threaten and blackmail, we will prosecute you." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "You would threaten me with prison." "I would offer you a path away from it," Arabella replied, "but I will not pretend you are innocent. You chose extortion." Thomas's mouth tightened, anger flaring. "And you chose a title bought with city gold." Arabella did not blink. "Yes, and now I'm here, using that choice to end your leverage." Silence fell. Edmund looked at her as if he had not known she could speak so coolly, so decisively. The solicitor slid the proposed agreement forward. Arabella had drafted the terms with careful fairness. Enough money to set Thomas into a legitimate business, a clause forbidding further demands, and a private acknowledgement of wrongdoing that Thomas could keep, though not publish. Thomas stared at it, suspicion and longing warring in his face. "This is hush money," he spat. Arabella shook her head. "It is restitution without publicity. Take it, and you leave this misery behind. Refuse it, and you remain a man chained to a dead lord's sins." Thomas's hands trembled slightly. He stared at Arabella, really stared, as if trying to find softness he could exploit. He found only steady resolve. At last, he grabbed the quill and signed. When it was done, Edmund exhaled as if he had been holding his breath for years. Outside, as they stepped into the street, Edmund turned to Arabella. "You saved us," he said, the words rawer than anything he had ever offered her. Arabella's gaze was calm. "I saved Ashcombe." Edmund's eyes held hers, and for the first time there was something in them that looked like warmth. "And me," he added quietly. Arabella's heart shifted, small and uncertain. She did not let it show. Not yet. Chapter 4. The moment the wall cracks. Returning to Ashcombe Hall felt different, though nothing outward had changed. The Countess still presided with her icy composure. Lady Honoria still offered half smiles. Julian still lounged, though now his eyes carried a new wariness around Arabella, as if he had realized she was not merely tolerating them but seeing them. Yet the house itself seemed to breathe easier. The estate accounts steadied. Withdrawals ceased. Edmund confronted Julian not with fury, but with finality. A fixed allowance, controlled and conditional, and a warning that further debts would not be paid. Julian protested, pleaded, sulked. But something about Edmund's tone, quiet, absolute, made even Julian understand the old pattern had ended. Arabella watched this change with a composed face and a private, tired satisfaction. But dignity, she learned, did not keep loneliness away. Edmund still did not come to her rooms. He still did not offer tenderness. His respect was real, but respect was not affection. And Arabella had been careful, from the beginning, not to want what had not been promised. Then one night, the Countess summoned Arabella to her sitting room. The older woman sat rigidly near the fire, her hands clasped too tightly. She did not invite Arabella to sit. Lady Honoria hovered near the window, eyes watchful. "I have been told," the Countess said, voice clipped, that you have been involving yourself in my son's affairs. Arabella's spine remained straight. I have been involving myself in the estate's affairs. They are now mine as well. The Countess's eyes flashed. Your dowry does not purchase authority over our blood. Arabella's voice remained gentle. No, but ruin does not ask permission. It arrives whether one has blood or not. Lady Honoria made a small sound, half protest, half fear. The Countess's jaw tightened. You went to London. Arabella's gaze held steady. Yes, and you spoke with people. Arabella understood then. Edmund must have told his mother something, enough to explain the trips and letters, but not enough to soothe her pride. And now the Countess, who feared shame more than injustice, sought control. I did what was necessary, Arabella said. The Countess's voice sharpened. You did what was improper. You exposed our family. I protected it, Arabella interrupted softly, then immediately softened her tone. My lady, I have no desire to humiliate you. I have kept everything private. The Countess's eyes narrowed. And yet you act as if you are equal. Arabella's heart tightened, but her expression stayed calm. I am your son's wife. The Countess leaned forward slightly, her voice low and cold. You are a merchant's daughter who bought her way into my house. Arabella's fingers curled once beneath her skirt and relaxed. She would not let the insult show as injury. Injury was what such women fed upon. She spoke quietly. Then perhaps you should be grateful your house can still stand. Silence fell, heavy as stone. Lady Honoria looked as if she might faint. The Countess's face flushed with shock. And then, from the doorway, a voice cut through the room. Enough! Edmund stood there, his expression controlled, but his eyes blazing with something Arabella had never seen in him before, anger on her behalf. He stepped into the room, closing the distance with measured force. Mother, he said, you will not speak to my wife that way. The Countess's lips tightened. Your wife. My wife, Edmund repeated, who has done more for this family in a season than any of us have done in years. The Countess's posture stiffened. You would shame me in my own sitting room. Edmund's voice was low, lethal in its calm. Arabella has spared you shame. I will not allow you to repay that mercy with cruelty. Arabella stood very still, her heart pounding not with triumph, but with a strange, aching disbelief. Edmund turned to her. His gaze softened, and that softness startled her more than his anger had. Come, he said quietly. Arabella followed him out, her steps steady. She did not glance back. They walked down the corridor in silence until Edmund pushed open the door to the library. There, away from witnesses and ancestral portraits, he stopped. I did not know, he said, voice rougher than usual, that she spoke to you like that. Arabella's throat tightened. It is not new, Edmund. His jaw clenched. Why did you not tell me? Arabella met his gaze. Because you did not marry me to be your confidant. You married me because my father made an arrangement. Edmund flinched as if struck. That is not. It is, Arabella said softly but firmly. You have been civil. You have been fair in public, but you have made it clear that affection was not part of the bargain. Edmund stared at her, something raw flickering beneath his composure. I thought. He stopped, as if unsure how to finish. Pride fought honesty in his eyes. Arabella's voice gentled. I have not demanded more than was offered. He took a step closer. And what was offered? Arabella's hands were clasped tightly, but her chin remained level. A title. A house. A duty. Edmund's eyes searched her face. And what have I taken? Arabella swallowed, the words difficult not because they were dramatic, but because they were true. My solitude, she said quietly. My voice, sometimes. My hopes, when I was foolish enough to have them. Edmund's breath came shallow. He looked, suddenly, like a man standing at the edge of a truth he had tried not to see. I have been unjust, he said. Arabella's smile was faint and tired. You have been proud. Edmund's mouth tightened. Yes. Silence held for a moment. Then Edmund said very quietly, When you came to this house, I despised what you represented. Arabella did not flinch. She had always known. You represented my family's need, he continued, voice tight. You represented my failure to protect Ashcombe without selling part of it. I told myself I disliked you, but what I truly disliked was that you were necessary. Arabella's eyes remained steady. And now? Edmund's gaze flickered, unsure, and for the first time he looked young. Now, he said, I do not know how to reconcile what I thought with what you are. Arabella's heart moved, small and treacherous. And what am I? Edmund stepped closer, stopping just short of touching her. His voice lowered. You are calm where I am furious. You are brave where my family hides behind pride. You have been insulted, by my mother, by Honoria, by Julian, by the neighbours, and you have never once lowered yourself to bitterness. Arabella's throat tightened. Bitterness would be a kind of surrender. Edmund's eyes held hers. You make me ashamed. Arabella shook her head gently. Shame is useless, Edmund. Change is not. Something in his expression cracked then, not into weakness, but into honesty. His hand lifted, hesitated, and then, very carefully, as if he did not know whether he had earned it, he took her gloved fingers. The touch was simple. It was not a grand gesture. It was, in its restraint, more intimate than any dramatic declaration. I am trying, he said quietly, to become the sort of man who deserves you. Arabella's eyes burned, but she did not let tears fall. She had cried too much in her head already, in silence. If she cried now, it would be from relief, and she refused to make relief look like pleading. Instead, she said softly, Then begin by seeing me, Edmund, not my father, not my dowry. Edmund's thumb brushed lightly over her knuckles, a gesture so restrained it could have been mistaken for accident. I see you, he said, voice low. And that is the trouble. Arabella's breath caught. Edmund leaned closer, not to kiss her, but to speak as if the words were too private for the air. I cannot pretend it any longer, he murmured. I have come to respect you, deeply, and respect has become something else. Arabella's heart hammered. She forced herself to remain calm, because dignity was not only armour, it was also courage. Say it, she whispered. Edmund's gaze held hers, fierce and uncertain. I think I am falling in love with you. Arabella stood very still, the confession echoing inside her like a bell. When she spoke, her voice was steady but soft. I have loved you longer than I intended to, she admitted, and I have hated myself for it. Edmund's eyes widened, a flash of pain and wonder. Arabella. She drew a careful breath. But love does not excuse disdain, she said, because she needed him to understand that her heart did not make her foolish. If we are to begin again, it must be with honesty. Edmund's grip tightened gently. Then I will be honest, he said. I was wrong, I was blind, and I want you, truly. Not as a bargain, not as an obligation, as my wife. Arabella's eyes softened. Then act like it. A small, unexpected sound escaped him, half laugh, half broken sigh. He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her gloved knuckles, reverent and restrained, as if he were making a vow in a quieter language. And Arabella, who had suffered in silence, who had held her dignity like a lantern against darkness, felt the first true warmth of belonging. The change did not happen overnight, as nothing real ever did. Edmund did not transform into a man made of poetry. The Countess did not become suddenly kind, but Edmund began to stand beside Arabella openly. He asked her opinion in front of his steward. He invited her into conversations rather than leaving her behind them. He spoke her name as if it mattered. And slowly, the house adjusted. Not because the family approved, but because Edmund made it clear that Arabella was no longer merely tolerated. In the autumn, when the hedgerows turned gold and the air sharpened, Edmund took Arabella riding across the estate. They paused at a hill overlooking Ashcombe Hall. "It is steadier," Edmund said quietly. "The debts, the land, the future." Arabella smiled faintly. "Yes." Edmund's gaze turned to her. "And us." Arabella looked at him, truly looked without armor. "We are steadier too," she said, "because we are built on truth, not fear." Edmund's hand found hers, warm and sure. "I will spend the rest of my life proving it," he said. Arabella's smile deepened, gentle and real. "Then we shall be happy," she replied. "Not because life will be easy. Ashcombe will always have its burdens, but because we will carry them together." Edmund leaned down and kissed her then, softly, without spectacle. The way a man kisses a woman he has finally understood is not his possession, but his equal. And beneath the watching sky, with the old house behind them and the repaired estate before them, Arabella Hart, once the merchant's daughter bought into nobility, stood as the Countess of Ashcombe not by purchase but by strength. She had suffered with dignity, she had fought with quiet courage, and at last she was loved, fully, openly, and well. The end. Thank you, dear reader of the Regency Gazette, for joining us in another tale of love, intrigue, and whispered ballroom secrets. If today's romance delighted you, kindly bestow a like upon this video. It helps our Gazette reach more lovers of Regency storytelling. For weekly journeys into dukes, debutantes, scandals, and slow-burning devotion, please subscribe to the Gazette and tap the little bell so you are notified the moment the next story is published. Until our next edition.